Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. Welcome back to Grief Uprooted. I'm your host, Christine Dernetter-Landon. First off, as usual, thank you so much for showing up today. I'm very excited about today's episode, but I do want to say thank you for all your comments. The last episode we released for Hospital for Sick Kids with Lori Ive Baines received raving reviews, so that was pretty awesome. So today, I just want to say thank you to all of you who reached out to actually thank Lori for all the amazing work she has done. And also to join us on our Facebook, our Instagram, listening to the podcast on YouTube, maybe Spotify, however you listen to your podcasts. Today's episode, super excited for the fact that we're going to talk about grief dreams. How many of us want to dream about our loved ones, hoping to kind of program ourselves so that we can go to sleep and have that dream about somebody we love who has died or a pet that has died? Can we actually program ourselves to do this? Or is it something that just happens and possibly you've had these dreams and you might find them disturbing? You're wondering if it's okay to be dreaming of your loved one who has died and what's really the reason or purpose for that. So I'm super excited today to be having Dr. Joshua Black. He has dedicated, he's like a trailblazer in the field of grief dreams. In all of 24 years that I've been doing this, I have never, ever, ever heard of anyone researching this. And when I met Joshua, we were actually at a conference. And when he told me what he was studying, I became super fascinated with it. So that's why I'm excited to have him on here today. So, in his work, he is the host of Grief Dreams, the podcast. He has been on PBS, Los Angeles Times, CBC News, Toronto Sun. So, his research in this area has kind of reached the masses and beyond. He is a Bereavement Initiative Manager for the BC Center for Palliative Care. So he's actually working in the industry also, and he's teaching psychology at the University of Fraser Valley. So today in this episode, we're going to really look at our deceased loved ones and pets and what is the purpose and meaning behind that grief dream. And I'm hoping to get some answers as to could we program ourselves to be able to see our loved ones? I know so many of you have asked me this question. How can I kind of visit them or see them? And how can we use these dreams for healing? And what to do if they're not feeling like they're healing? What to do if we're getting this feeling of uncomfortableness? So let's go. Super excited to meet Joshua. Let's go. All right. I have been dying to bring you on this podcast. As I have mentioned to many of you out there, so many people come to me and ask about grief dreams. Everybody, actually, I hear the most popular question is, how do I program myself to have a grief dream? So it's like people really, really want to do this. So I've jumped the gun because I'm super excited to have you here. So welcome, Joshua Black, and love the research you've chosen. And before I let the cat out of the bag, I want to know, before we start this episode, what the heck brings you to grief? Like, this isn't something people choose just randomly. So I would love to know your grief story or what brought you to this field of grief.
Yeah, so first, thank you for having me. It's always nice when people
Mm.
are willing to just interview me, but also talk about a subject that I'm so passionate about. And the story, as you said, it's very interesting on how life guides a path for you
Mhm.
to get to a place where people then value the work that you are doing. And so for me, I had no no pathway here. I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. That was my goal.
Mm.
And so I went to university for that. I was volunteering. I was doing so many things to try to like have that as my focus. And then in my final year of my university undergrad, my father died very suddenly. And for me, it was the first time I had a significant loss in my life, and I didn't know what was going on inside me. Like I was crying, I couldn't stop. The thoughts I was having were very, very different in the sense of like I remember I was like, oh, I'm not gonna have any more memories. I couldn't recall any memories of my father, and that upset me even more.
Mm,
So there's like just so much going on inside me. And then I remember after the funeral, I'm like, I just want to go back to school. I just want to go back to work. I don't want to have this sadness anymore.
mm.
And what happened was I was able to achieve that.
Oh,
But
good
what
for
happened was,
you.
well, no, it's not a way to go, Joshua.
Mm,
This was more of, it's an interesting survival technique because what happened
yeah,
was I wasn't feeling sadness anymore to go back to work, but I also wasn't feeling any joy. And
yeah.
so I was in this kind of like gray and like black and white world where I was walking through where I wasn't really experiencing anything inside anymore. And I thought, oh, this is just my life now moving forward. And I didn't even have like an idea that, oh, I could change this or maybe there's something here that I can work on. And so I just went back to school and work, and people thought I was just, you're doing great. Like they praise you, but they don't understand like I'm not actually doing good. It's like a survival technique to just not feel the pain of that. And so what happened was about 3 months later, out of the blue, I had this dream of my father, and it was the most profound dream I had at the time. And so in the dream, he was there, standing there. And I looked at him and he looked healthy and like light, and he always had so much heaviness to him. He had an addiction problem with alcohol, and he just had a lot of trauma he hasn't worked through, and so he always had this heaviness to him. But he looked so light, and the environment was so loving, which is
Mm,
also new in itself. And so I walked up to him and I said, "I'm going to miss you," acknowledging the loss. And I said I loved him, and we hugged. And then I woke up. But when I woke up, was the craziest thing was that something changed in me.
mhm,
I woke up, the joy was back. I could regulate my emotions. I wasn't afraid of sadness. And I remember sitting at the edge of my bed thinking, what was that? Like, how do I have 3 months and go to bed and then all of a sudden I have this dream and everything change? I still don't fully understand it, but people across cultures and across the world are having these experiences that these dreams can really change them for the better or even for the worse, depending on what the dream is. But for me, it really changed me for the better and allowed me to value these dreams. And what was interesting was when I woke up, moved forward, I didn't tell anyone about the dream. I just kind of
mhm.
like moved forward. And, it wasn't really something I shared, which I think is crazy because it changed my entire life.
Well,
But
and that's kind of it. Like I have to
yeah.
back you up when I giggle when you're like, "Well, I went back to work." That's because I carry this like a jar, and everyone thinks it's me, the kids, but it's actually Annie from like 1940. I put her in a jar because that's exactly how my grief experience was. I
Mm,
was like, I'm just going to put this in a bottle, and I was 14, and I'm just going to put it over there. And what I have found from doing Grief Uprooted, which fascinates me, is that people, even when they're older, when they're hit with this trauma, they have the capability of doing the same thing, that I'm just going to push it aside and I'm going to bottle it. And I remember being at a conference once and a friend saying to me, and we all work in the industry, and don't talk about grief. I'm not dealing with this. And I was like, "Oh, you're actually acknowledging you're putting it in a bottle and placing it over there. And I'll get to that in another couple of years, right?" So it is a practice that people do. And then I think with your grief dream, that's exactly it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody says, like, I dreamed about my loved one last night. They kind of dismiss it.
hmm
And that's so this obviously took you, because I remember sitting on a couch. I don't know if you remember this, at Bereavement Ontario Network. And I sat down on the couch, and Lori Ive Baines was on one side and you were there. And I just remember talking about what you study. And I
mm
kind of was like, what are you going to do with that? Right. And I became kind of fascinated because I thought, myself included, have had so many different dreams. And we'll get into it because I've also had nightmares and wondered what those are. So after the dream, what did you do after that?
went back to school. I did
Ah!
finish up my undergrad, and then I applied to become the elementary school teacher. It was fascinating. Once I got the call for the interview, I didn't feel it was right anymore, which is so crazy because I spent my whole entire life like aiming for this, and then all of a sudden it just didn't feel right. And I think part of that was because my dad was influencing my choice
Mhm.
to become a school teacher. He had my whole entire life. And so I think part of that goal was his goal. And
Yeah.
so because he died, it just didn't, I didn't need to do it maybe. And I didn't feel, and maybe something else was pulling me somewhere else. And here I am. So I decided to not do that. And then that was interesting to try to figure out what do I do now then? And
Yeah.
so I volunteered at a hospice in that time. And what was fascinating for me that really like I think pivoted me to want to understand this topic more was people kept asking about their dreams. And I didn't say anything about my own, but they're asking like, why haven't I had a dream? Is something wrong with them? Is,
Mhm.
whatsoever, or why am I having these negative dreams? Or how come I'm not having a dream and someone else is, or something like that, and they're jealous. And I'm like, this is like for me, like I didn't know. Like I had my one positive dream at a time, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but I grew up or I was trained in psychology, so I went to the research and looked, and there wasn't anything to answer their questions. And so I was like, oh, I wonder if I could do something like that. So it took me a couple of years to get the courage to sort of say I'm going to apply because I wasn't trained in that area, and nor did
Mhm.
I want to do research, but I knew it was going to be a learning curve. But at the end of the day, I said, you know what, I'm going to put my best foot forward, see what happens. And lo and behold, I got into my MA to look at this topic some more, and I realized once I was in there, I didn't have enough time to answer all the questions that I went in there to try to answer. So then I was able to do my PhD
Yeah.
in psychology, and I was able to answer a lot of those questions through the research, and that was really my passion. And I really enjoy raising awareness on the topic because it's something that a lot of people don't know about. And when it comes to grief literacy, it's something that we should know about since it happens to most people who are dreaming. And if they're not dreaming, they may have these questions um, that they sort of have for not, why am I not dreaming of the deceased? And so there's a lot here, and it's also cross culture. We talk about indigenous cultures
Mhm.
in grief and the importance of understanding that. And dreams have been such an integral part of their culture. And it's like when we can honor these grief dreams more, we can honor cultures more too and how they sort of process their grief and be able to be curious about how they interpret their dreams because it's all based on their belief systems and
Yeah.
also, like their own experiences.
Well, and I think what's so interesting is, and everybody out there knows that when they listen to this podcast, my biggest beef is we don't talk about it in the school system. But we talk about sex like crazy, right? We're going to teach you how to have sex, but we're not going to teach you what to do when that person you've chosen to love may die, or you create life and that might die. So I often think there's we do need to have grief literacy. We do need to start talking about it. And we can talk about it in a way from an emotional aspect. Like you're emotionally going to feel these things happen to you when someone you love dies. And we just skip over it. But when we look at grief dreams, I'd love to dive in. So, what exactly is a grief dream? I've had where um, and what I'm asking about is like, I very much love energy work, Reiki. I love meditation, but a grief dream, I would assume, but you correct me, I'm gonna fall asleep at night and I'm gonna have this dream and wake up in the morning and I'm actually gonna retain it. That's I feel like is one of the key things. I am avidly the person who Googles every morning because I dream all the time. I have flown. I have actually thought I took the car out and destroyed it to look out the window and the car is fine. I actively dream and I love dreaming, especially flying. And so I'm that girl who's Googling everything and buys dream interpretation books and stuff. So I know, totally. I am so into it. That's why when you were like researching this, I thought this is going to be so fun. Um, but what exactly is a grief dream? Like I have to be sleeping. Am I correct?
Yeah, that would be the key. That's where you have your dreams. And so you're dreaming throughout sleep, in REM and non-REM. And yeah, like remembering them has an impact, but like I'm still debating on that maybe some of these dreams that we don't remember can still have a huge impact on our grief journey. But what are grief dreams? So there's three different kind of forms of them. There's one where the deceased is not present. and no one mentions them, but it's really reflective of someone's grief that they're processing in waking life. So this could be running by a mountain and the mountain collapses on you. And it can really just represent the heaviness of life on you and the difficulty of that. And then you have the ones where the deceased is not present, but people are mentioned within, but they're people mention the deceased in the dream or their loss, or they maybe visit something that is related to the loss itself. So it could be the hospital that maybe the person died at. Could be, I've seen like angels, I've seen other characters give their condolences or talk about the deceased in some way. And then lastly is the ones where the deceased is a part of the imagery. And that's what everyone wants to talk about. And that's where most of my research is in. But I have to sort of say that these other two are also pretty like common within the grief journey. And when it talks about like understanding these dreams, that is one of the places people get, you'd say, hung up because we don't understand our own dream language. So because that we go on the internet, we
Yeah.
Google, but the sad story of all that is that it's not actually doing you any good
Mhm.
because your dream language is different than the people that you're looking at, their thoughts in their own dream language, basically. Because it's not like a universal kind of language. It's all based on your experiences, based on your own symbols for whatever, emotions mean or things mean to you. And it'll be totally different for other people. So if you love dogs and you have a dream of a dog, it'd be different from someone who is, say, afraid of dogs and
Mm.
has like a dream. So there's like so many things that you have to be aware of. And there's also a story that's going along. So it's not even just like I had a dream of a dog. Like it's never that
Mm.
simple. It's always like I had a dream of a dog driving a car, you know, flying in the sky. There's like this story that goes along with many dreams. And so you really have to connect the symbols and connect the emotions in the dreams to really understand what it's trying to say. And sometimes it's just processing your
Mm.
waking life in some way. So it's very passive that way. It's just trying to process some of the trauma or some of the grief. Other times it's more active. It's actually trying to give you understanding and provide you solutions to some of the issues that you may be dealing with and problems that you may be having. And so dreams are a really good tool to increase our emotional intelligence, but also guidance in a lot of ways on maybe what we need to work on moving as we move forward. Because one of the things I've learned is that you can either think you're farther than you really are, right? In the sense of, oh, like I've dealt with grief, and then like all of a sudden you're having these dreams, but maybe there's more there, right? Like it's something sort of to reflect on. Other times, maybe you think you're worse than you are, and one of those things too is, these dreams can help us sort of understand a little bit more of who we are and what we're processing, and to give time for our grief. And you sort of mentioned that when you wake up in the morning, sometimes we're just so busy, we don't honor our grief as much as we need to as humans. And that's, I'm great with, that was my first thing. Is I don't want to honor my grief. I want to move forward. I got to do things, and that's the culture. It's like keeping busy, but grief has a funny way of basically calling out to you, and
Well,
sometimes it's
and
through
I
your
wonder,
dreams.
I love how, like, even to go back to the bottle analogy with our unconscious, I always wonder, is it my unconscious, like my unconsciousness, coming forward? Like it's in me, but I've pushed it so far back, that inner child work, pushing that inner child down and not wanting to face all these fears, right? And it's a buzz right now. Everybody's talking about it. And is our unconscious have all these answers? And often just waking up from a dream. I've had so many dreams of my brother who fell over Niagara Falls Gorge, and since then experienced so many other deaths in my life. And I've dreamed of these people actively. And I've actually had conversations and wanted to talk to them. I also felt like I've had lucid dreams where I think, oh my goodness, like that really happened. And so I've become really, like, sometimes I'm really excited to go to bed. I'm like, I want to dream. Like it's nicer than my waking life sometimes, right? I'm like, this is way better. And then other times I don't dream. But I wonder with grief dreams that there's that emotional component. And as you were talking, like sometimes I feel like you're just seeing all sorts of things, but you just feel good. Like you feel like your loved one who has died is there with you,
Hmm.
and that just brings you so much comfort. So
Yeah.
when you wake from this dream though, um, did you find in your research that some people were highly disturbed by it. Like I have witnessed with my own clients that some people are like, I don't want to dream about them anymore. I did not enjoy the dream. And or they're dismissing it. Like it must have been because I watched this movie. It must have been because of this. Um, do you find people are really accepting of it, or do you find a lot of them are like, no?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of questions there,
Sorry.
but no, that's fine. But yeah, there's going to be people in different places when it comes to these dreams.
Yeah.
But these dreams tend to be more important than any other dream they've had because of the
Mm.
significance of who it is that's usually in the dream. So yes, there's going to be some people that wake up from a, let's say, a comforting dream and they feel beautiful. They feel love and they feel that it was a magical moment in time that they got to sort of see the person they cared about again. Because one of the things you got to understand is that most people, when they go to the funeral, that was the last time they saw them, right? Like
Yeah.
that's so they're either dead or they're suffering. And so this is another time that they're seeing them that they never thought was possible, right? Like so there's also that excitement to say, oh, I can actually see them again in this way. And in the dream, if you're not having a lucid dream, you have no idea that this isn't real.
Yeah.
For the most part, people are in that moment and it's real. It's only when you wake up you realize it was a dream.
Mm.
But some people still believe it was a visitation, so it was still very real as they wake up. So the question is, yeah, so yeah, some people are comforted. Other people, they'll have a very beautiful dream, but then they wake up having a beautiful moment, but they also realize how much they miss them. And so
Mm.
then that can be the crushing distress of just their grief coming back because
Yeah.
the realization of what they don't have anymore. Then lastly, people are going to have just pure distress. So that could be, let's say, having a dream of the deceased dead, dying, or ill again, or the deceased maybe chasing them or causing them harm. And so really can really erupt some of the guilt or regret that they may even already have been carrying to like a higher extent, or that the trauma to sort of be activated again. And so, yeah, very difficult for those individuals to process that because they're basically re-traumatized as they're trying to start the day. And as you know, with trauma, you just can't just jump in and move forward. So it can really be a hindrance to them. And the issue with that also is that when you avoid these dreams, especially these negative ones, what tends to happen is you have more of them. And
Mm.
so a lot of times that people are having these dreams, they just don't know how to process them and they don't know the right perspective to be able to manage them. And there is, but no one's ever told them about it. And so they're suffering in silence for the most part on trying to find a way to deal with these dreams with their own mechanisms, where
Mm.
there's, I think, more simple tools and understandings to understand what those dreams are to allow you to reduce your distress and even eliminate the dreams altogether, as you sort of move forward trying to work through your grief.
So I'm going to stop you there before you get into that one because I wanted to know your opinion on a lot of people do believe their loved one has come back to talk to them. Um, and so do you believe that that could possibly be, or is it one of those things like we really don't know?
Well, we actually don't know,
I said,
but yeah,
yeah,
you can't test that. But I've seen enough to know that it may be possible,
yeah,
And I will just, but which ones are which, who knows? But it's really based on the dreamer and what they feel, and if it's benefiting them in their life. Like that's how I go about these dreams. It's like I have no idea, but what do you believe? And I will believe that when we're together, and we'll work with that.
firmly, for myself, firmly believe it. I
Mhm.
have followed that path and used that guidance, and it's worked great for me. But we're going to take a small break because I want to come back and figure out where you mentioned there are tools that we could actually use with our grief dreams to help us move forward. So we'll be right back.
We interrupt this podcast for a dirty moment.
Okay, so my dirty moment is when I actually was on stage picking up my PhD. And so my dad had been dead for, I want to say maybe 8 years at that point, 8, 9 years at that point. And I always thought when I was finishing my thesis, I would be triggered, but that never happened. I was fine, cool as a cucumber. And then when I just went on stage and I got handed the degree, and I got to sit on stage because when you get a PhD, you get to actually stay on stage. And then
Mhm.
once I sat on stage, I felt this overwhelming emotion come over me because I was looking at the audience and I could see my mom, but I could not see my father. And it was because of my father that I was on stage and getting this degree. And so I teared up a little bit but I also understood that this is probably not the time to break down. And so I kept it at bay, but I could still see it. So I didn't push it away where it's like, like it doesn't exist. I was still honoring it. And then once the ceremony was done, I went to my car and I was able to cry and honor it that way. And so that was my time where probably the last time that it really that came up so heavy. It was when I got that degree.
Grief can feel like a barrier when you're trying to connect to your loved one who has died. What if I was to tell you that you can create a space where your loved one and your memories can come to life again, that you can see them in your mind's eye? As somebody who specializes in Reiki and grief and trauma, I can join you in a Reiki treatment that will create that space for your grief to come forward, for giving you the ability to connect to your loved one who has died, either in your memories, your dreams. Together, we'll explore where your grief is at. We'll explore the memories and the great courage and strength that you actually carry. Grief at times can feel so heavy and it can be so dark, but there are memories there. Your loved one lives on in you. And together, we can take that path. We can walk that journey. And let's start it with a great Reiki session, do the exploration of our grief dreams, and bring those memories together to bring you the strength and the healing that you deserve. Check me out at griefuprooted.com or just reach out to me. I would love to start the conversation. I would love to walk beside you on your grief journey. All right, so we're back, and I'm a fast talker, eh? I'm super excited about this topic, so I'm throwing all these questions at you. Um, so one of the things that I really, before we start analyzing and looking at the dreams, I just want to talk about like a terror dream. I remember having this conversation with you, and I was talking about like nightmares or terrors. Like, do you recall those very often? Like a terror, like what's the difference?
So a nightmare is just a really bad and distressing dream. A night terror is they're having an experience in a dream, but they just don't remember it when they wake up for the most part. So night terrors are more scary for parents or anyone else external to them because they'll wake up screaming, but they'll have really no recollection of that. And they'll go back to bed. Where a nightmare, you wake up, you understand the dream, you can articulate it, and then you'll maybe talk about it with your parents or whoever, right? So that's sort of the main difference.
And why is there a reason why we wouldn't remember a night terror, but it would cause us to scream or
Well,
no?
because you're experiencing it, right? Like, so that's part of a sleep disorder. Yeah. So like
Yes.
that's why you can also sleepwalk, sleep talk, sleep eat, like all this sort
And
of
that's
stuff,
why
right?
they never
So
remember.
that's why I never remember. Yeah.
Oh, look at, I learned, I'd never even thought about that, but you're right. Cause people sleepwalk and you say you're sleepwalking and they go, no, I'm
Mhm.
not. Right.
That-
And so
It's
then you're
true.
like, oh yeah, you did. Okay. So that's the difference, but it's still
Yeah.
affecting them physically and emotionally, obviously.
Yeah, but I think a nightmare would probably affect them differently
Yeah.
than a night terror because it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue as like 'cause they don't remember the dream. So when they wake up, they don't even know they had the experience for the most part. Where a nightmare, it's triggering their trauma and then they're remembering that throughout their day. So I would say the nightmare would be something that you can actually work with and talk about with the individual more so. And if it's just like someone that's witnessing the terror, just educating them on the best way to go about that. So
And
they
handle
feel at peace that it's not actually causing them as much trauma as they think it is.
it. So when we look at a nightmare, which I actively have all the time,
Hmm.
and so I am always like, I never seem to really sleep. And when I do, I'm really happy. But so I will have extreme nightmares that disturb me for the rest of the day.
Hmm.
And when you look at those and people grieving, is it balanced? Like some people have nice grief dreams and other people have nightmares, or is it just a combination of that person's experiences?
Well, I think a little bit of both, but I think it's understanding maybe dreams a little bit more to understand that issue. So, one
Mhm.
of the things with the Western theory, anyways, on dreams is that dreams represent our waking life. So it's called the continuity hypothesis. So, in general, most people are having negative dreams on average, just in general, without grieving or whatever, because most people are going to bed stressed. And so if you remember, I was talking about dreams can have like a very passive role. So however you're feeling in the day and the things you're going through is going to sort of come through in your dreams.
Oh.
And after trauma, you have more consistently negative dreams
Mm.
because you're dealing with trauma.
Mhm.
After grief, one would think you would have more negative dreams. But
Mm.
what we're finding when it comes to deceased, anyways, is that it's more common to have positive dreams of the deceased than negative, which is very unusual. Uh, which, which is, I think, its own kind of tale on why people sort of see them differently because they're acting differently than normal dreams. People can still have these negative dreams of the deceased. And I'll just give you some quick stats on that. So around two samples I did after pet loss and also spousal loss, around like 90% of people had a positive dream theme of the deceased, and around 40 had a negative dream theme. But those who had a negative dream theme also very commonly, 95% had a positive dream. So it's very common for people to only have positive dreams, or if they had a negative one, to also have a positive one. And what we've sort of seen, and just by talking with people, a lot of times in the beginning, as one's processing their grief, those negative dreams tend to be more prevalent. And then as they working through their grief, those positive dreams can sort of come and be sort of the next thing moving forward. And so when it comes to just dreams without the deceased, I would think it'd be very similar to trauma, where a lot of people are having negative dreams
Mhm.
based on the emotions that they're going through and the difficulties that they're and the challenges in their life. But when it comes to deceased being present, they tend to be more positive.
Yeah, that's interesting because it seems to follow the natural path of healing. Like how in the beginning we're struggling with, guilt,
Mhm.
self-blame, loneliness, all these things, and we're trying to process it in our head in our waking life, going, why did they die? Why did this happen? Is it my fault? And then once we hit a place where we gain some understanding, I never really want to say acceptance. I feel like it's integrated into who we are and it just becomes part of our life. And you start to live with it actively there. And I think that's where this is part of it. So culturally fascinated by that too. And so I'll try not to speak too fast. But just working with indigenous cultures, when aiding in September 11th, the terrorist attacks, and working in grief camps after that, I was honored to be able to work with elders, and really dreams had a real heavy meaning. Like, and I loved how there was that guidance and ability to interpretate them and go, this is what you're being told. And it really brought a lot of comfort, especially when you're aiding in another country and you're living in a small cabin and you're feeling quite lonely. You start to embrace these. So culturally, um, I think dreams, like you say, are just not talked about. But in certain cultures, I think it is. What is it like culturally across the board?
That's very true. And so when we talk about dream symbols and stuff like that, it's also understanding that different cultures will have sometimes their own dream language that they teach. And so if you're dreaming of that and you're in that culture, that could be a good representation of maybe the interpretation of that dream because you've already learned it. But if
Hmm.
you're an outsider of that culture and you have a dream of whatever and you go to their culture to try to take knowledge from that, it
Hmm.
probably won't sort of work that way.
Hmm.
So it's just like understanding that. So if you've been taught something, then your dreams can actually help you th with that kind of language to teach yourself and like what the purpose is, right? So I know different cultures believe in precognitive dreams. They also can believe that some of the negative dreams people have could be also deceased visitations, so more or less hauntings.
Hmm.
And also, if they're dreaming of them, it could represent something. So maybe if they believe in reincarnation, maybe that's not reincarnated. And so they've been maybe dead maybe 2 or 3 years and they're having these positive dreams of the deceased. That could be very disheartening because of the belief that if they're dreaming of them, it means that they're not reincarnated. So that's just that belief. And then they have like these merits that they provide to try to reincarnate the soul faster. And so there's all different beliefs that go along with it. I've seen some other cultures, they won't start their final feast or for the deceased until they have a dream. I was very like so it's very interesting on how these dreams are incorporated within one's culture and in one's life. That's why it's always great to be curious when you're
Mm.
meeting someone and talking to someone about their dreams, especially if they're from a different culture, because they're gonna have a lot of different ideas about it. But when it comes to these negative dreams, I always have in the backdrop that it also could be just processing trauma that they're going through. Um, because that's like our Western science has sort of kind of like showcase that a lot. But like those positive dreams, we say like we don't fully understand them. And I like to say like that can be anything you want if it's providing that kind of comfort.
Yeah, and I feel like it's your body, mind, and spirit trying to heal you. I feel like you're just keep going. It's like I'm going to try to heal you here, and I'm going to give you some more opportunities, and you're processing it at night. So when you're doing all this, and I know that everybody's dying to know, I want to go to bed and I want to have a grief dream. Like are we programmable? Can we do
Not that I know of yet.
that?
There are like different maybe tools or tricks you could probably use to just think about dreams. One of the things that we did find because we looked at, why are some people dreaming of the deceased and others aren't?
Hmm.
And what we've sort of found in multiple studies was that we looked at a lot of different variables, and what was consistent in both studies and the most important predictor was dream recall frequency in general. So what
Oh.
that says is the more you remember your dreams, the more likely you'll catch one of these dreams when they're happening. And so that's interesting in itself, because for me, it says that we're probably dreaming of the deceased more than we're actually remembering it. And that's where it comes like, well, are those dreams still as beneficial to the ones that we are remembering? Like when we talk about resilience and be able to um, transition through this time, how much is that also based on these dreams we're not remembering? I don't know. We can't see dreams at this moment, so we can only go by what people are sharing. And so that's the biggest thing. You can also, and there's different ways to increase your dream recall. So in the Western culture, we kind of downplay dreams, and so most people have a lower recall rate than maybe other cultures who value dreams. But if you value dreams, what happens is you start remembering more.
Mm.
So just by writing it down, talking about it, thinking about dreams, you'll basically telling your mind that these are important now to me, and it'll start to increase its frequency. And I did that. So I usually have 3 dreams a week that I remember. And then I remember writing them down in a journal. Every time I had a dream, I'd write down, write down. And then I think within a couple months, it was up to like 3 dreams a night. I'd be waking up because my mind's like, oh, you like this? Okay, here's some more,
Yeah.
right? Here's some more,
Well,
this kind
that
of thing.
explains me because I started
Yeah.
at like my brother died when I was 14, and I for me I started dreaming of him right away, and then believed I saw him in my waking life. So I became very much and in my family this was not good. And I just remember our priest was giving me some books on how to take the demons out, and I was just like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm dreaming
Yeah.
about him, I see him, I love this.
Yeah.
And for me it was a very positive experience, but I did start to get confused as a child, going, what's real, what's not. And the dreams and the waking life started to, and then, of course, I was floating in the bottle, and hence why I'm in the field of grief now. And so I was became so fascinated by it because to me, Rob died, but he transcended. It was
Mm,
like he was in here, and I had this capability of seeing. And so I started writing, and now I wake up all the time dreaming. And
mm.
I'm always talking about what I dreamed about first thing in the morning. And everybody's like, yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay.
Because I have to announce it to the whole house. Guess what I dreamed about last night, right? And
That's great.
and I love dreaming, but I
Hmm.
also do not love, I have horrific nightmares, and I've had
Yep.
that too. And I know that all those things come into play. So, what are some of the things, like you had mentioned, there are things we can do to get rid of them or bring them on? So, if we wanted to bring them on,
Hmm.
start your dream journal. That would be number one.
Yep.
Start writing them down and talking about them. And the other thing I wanted to just kind of go back to, because I was talking about whether you had to be asleep, because we do like a manifestation where you can sit and meditate and bring forth your loved one in your mind. And I
Okay.
tend to find when you're meditating, it's a very emotional experience for people, when you're sitting with them and having them close their eyes, relax, and literally bring forth memories. And obviously, we're bringing forth positive memories and being able to have conversations that we possibly couldn't have with them before they died. And I always find that hugely impactful, never to be done alone. But also from after having a session of Reiki or this manifestation in a meditation, um, they often come back and say, last night I had a dream of this.
Mm.
And we're able to explore that dream and kind of break it down and go, was this your body continuously wanting to heal? Which is super amazing that it's like you're going to continue off in your sleep doing this. So that's how we could encourage it, obviously, by talk, by writing about it. What if I don't want to do it anymore?
Well, the same thing goes. If you don't want, let's say, dreams or having a lot of negative nightmares, if you're writing them down, you're just continuing going to remember those dreams. And so
Yeah.
you can also decrease your frequency by not wanting to talk about it, not writing them down, not giving them the time of day when you wake up. And then what happens is it starts shifting to sort of a lower recall rate. So you can sort of change that. And there's going to be 10% of the population that just doesn't remember dreaming in general. It's not, they're not set up for that in that way. But for everyone else, like those are just kind of like tips and tools. But if you're having negative dreams, and so this is sort of the important part here, the big thing is understanding dreams and just understanding some basic knowledge of what's maybe going on. And so in Western cultures, understanding that your waking life is producing your emotions, everything is producing these images that are coming up in your dreams.
Mhm.
And so there's a key there to understand that there's a clue to understand who you are in waking life and what you're processing.
Mhm.
So that's a big one. But it takes a long time to work through some of that, especially if it's trauma. Like it takes time to unpack and look at that. Sometimes it's like one thing and you realize it, oh yeah, like I haven't been avoiding the loss, or I've been avoiding the guilt or something triggered the guilt. And then you can sort of sit with that. And then as you process that, you wouldn't have to dream about it again because now you know, right? Um, but that takes a long time and it can take time. So the other thing you can do is called dream rescripting. And so it works with children and adults alike. And it's funny because I had a lot of nightmares growing up as a kid, and I used to do this, and I didn't understand that this is actually the proper thing to do. And so it's
I
kind of
love
cool that I
that.
just it came out. But what you do is you have a dream that you wake up from that nightmare and you rescript it to something more positive. And so either that could be changing the ending, so it's something more positive, or adding a character in the dream to change the outcomes of the events. And what research has shown is that once you do that, you rehearse that new dream during
Mhm.
the waking day. And within a couple of weeks, what you sort of see is a decrease and any kind of distress from those dreams moving forward, but also an elimination of those dreams, especially if they're repeated from continuing on. And so you're basically taking ownership and you have a tool to be able to almost attack the dreams. A lot of times we wake up and we feel almost like a victim to the dream that we can't do anything about and we feel helpless, which triggers those dreams like more. But once you realize you're not helpless, you can actually do things. What they found is that by doing the dream rescripting, you can also, when those dreams kind of like you'd say stop or distress, your trauma symptoms will also go down too. And so it's by working on your dreams, you'll also be working on your grief and trauma at the same time, which I think is very fascinating.
That is fascinating. So, what if you had a little guy, little child, and they were having these nightmares? I naturally I'm exceedingly verbal, and I would be like, "Oh, I dreamed about this." And at times I don't want to describe it because I just feel like it's horrific and nobody else in the room needs to hear it.
Yeah.
Um, but then I've had where colleagues have went, "You should share it. It'll be good for you." And then, you're trying to say it, but you're crying. And, you
You
know,
don't need to say it.
yeah, that makes so
You
much
don't need to
sense
say it.
where
Yeah.
it's
You don't
like,
need to
oh,
say it.
maybe it's not a great thing to share. But what if I'm a little guy in bed, like a little kid, and I'm having these nightmares, and which is so common for kids when it
Mhm.
comes to grief or trauma. And, you know, they naturally are going to suppress them down. They're not going to talk about it. How do you rescript it? So, say I'm a little one that just had this horrific nightmare and this monster comes out and they're going to kill me too because my dad died. And
Mm.
how do they rescript it? Is it like we can then all of a sudden take the monster and make the monster actually not be that?
Yeah, you could ask the monster questions. You could bring in a superhero
Mm,
that can, attack the monster and then talk about the grief. There's a lot of different things that you could do. But I think the first thing with children is to just, honor the dreams and like talk to them about dreams. Like Inside Out, which I love, the first movie talks about dreams, right? In such a beautiful way too. And they do it through the continuity hypothesis. Remember, she had like a
yes.
fear of public speaking, or because she had that moment while she got embarrassed while she was public speaking. And so the dream was about that, and they're recreating that. And that's exactly what's going on. So I think by asking about dreams with children,
Hmm.
it's a really good tool to understand what they're even feeling, because like they have a hard time understanding their own emotional language. And
Yeah.
so if they're having these negative dreams of the like just in general or of the deceased, it can be a really big sign of what they're trying to work with and deal with. And you can talk about that as a caregiver to them. There's been a lot of different times where the dream itself is a key to understanding not only the distress, but what the difficulties in understanding. Either it's become from the death, or understanding about their own grief, or maybe they're seeing the deceased in waking life like you did, and that caused them great discomfort, and challenges their understanding of if they're even dead or not.
Mm-hmm.
And just fun fact, new research I just pushed out recently this month was I actually looked at not only the dreams, but also these waking life experiences after loss that people can have. And it's very common. So around 40% of people in the sample in the last month had either they saw, heard, or felt the deceased. And sometimes people even smell the deceased in waking life. And so it's actually a common thing that is going on. We don't fully understand why that is going on, but a lot of people are distressed when it happens because they think something's wrong with them. But it's actually not something wrong with them. It's actually part of the grieving process that we don't understand, just like dreams. And I think yeah, so one of the reasons for that is to raise awareness of grief literacy. Is they have to raise awareness in these aspects that actually cause people a lot of discomfort and
Yeah.
distress in their life because they don't fully understand it, which like a lot of these nightmares is their distress because they don't understand it. Like when I have a dream, a negative dream, I'm like, oh, this relates to waking life. Okay, what does
Hmm.
this mean? And then I get excited because I learned something new about me that I can actually now move forward with and like look at and focus on. And so a lot of times kids would be the same way. If you give them understanding, there's less distress. Like with anything in life, the more we understand about something, the less distress it gives us, because now we can learn and we can also maneuver around them. And so for the child, it's like you just ask the child, no, so this is the dream. What dream would you want to have
Yeah.
instead? And you can kind of like even relate the two together. So if like a monster's chasing you, you wake up, well then the dream, you say, oh, you can continue the dream where I turn around and see who's chasing me. Oh, it's like a teddy bear and just wants to sort of hug me and tell me he's sorry about the loss, right? Like just something like that, like so beautiful. And the child can even draw it or whatever. Like there's a lot of things that you can do towards that to just allow people to not be afraid of dreams, but I would say learn from them.
I love that because, and first off, I have to say, did you hear that? We're not all crazy. Because so many people say, I see my loved one, I smell my loved one, I feel the presence of my loved one. And and so many times in our culture, it's been like, oh, it's all your mind, it's all projection, it's all. And what I look at is if this is making you feel good and this is helping you heal and give you a direction, why not? And
Hmm.
no one really understands it. So we fear what
Yeah.
we don't understand.
No, I think that's the importance of the research, though, right? Like to allow
Yeah.
people to validate the experiences are real and how common they are.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so for it's more common to have these dreams of the deceased than it is to have these waking life experiences. But at the same time, they're really high. Like, so half the people that you're going to come in contact with that are grieving will have one, if not both, those experiences
Yeah.
as they sort of move forward. And like I will say, I didn't mention the stats that we have for the frequency of these dreams. And so after partner loss, it was 86% after the first year or two.
Mhm.
It's almost like everyone that
Yeah.
has. And then after pet loss, it was 78% within the first 6 months. And even after a miscarriage, it was 57% within the first year. And so they've never actually seen the child, but they're having dreams of either being pregnant again,
Mhm.
or the birth mother being pregnant again, or the actual image of the deceased
Yeah.
child, either in baby, as one or two, or even as a teenager. And so it's very interesting on how these dreams are different for different types of loss, also as we move forward.
And they seem to be all present for the one thing, healing. It's for processing and understanding. And I love
Yeah.
how you're framing it like that. Like this is something that happens to us so we can gain an understanding, good or bad. It's here to help you understand so you can heal and kind of move forward. I heard you say something on an interview about the power of love, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I'm curious, what was that all about? Like, how does that tie into all this? Because I love how you just I was watching you and in the interview, I can't recall what the question was, but yours was like, this is the power of love. And I
Yeah.
totally get that. Like, explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so when you look at these dreams, one thing I've learned, like I've saw thousands of dreams and you start looking at dreams across cultures, the themes may be a little bit different,
Mm,
but one of the main factors of these dreams that are comforting is this profound love that is a part of the imagery in some way. There's a feeling that people get that's different than other feelings in waking life. Because I think a lot of times we are so stressed, and even when we're in a moment in time, the stress is still there. But in these dreams, that's all there is. And so I think that's very beautiful to sort of see that. And so I think that when you look back at my dream I had with my father, I was able to say goodbye, which I think was very healing. I was
mm,
able to tell him I loved him, which was very healing because I never really did. The last time I did it was probably as a kid. Like we were just like two guys that, kind of understood that, but we never actually said it. But there was this profound love. And I always look back and like, what was the thing that healed me? And I would say it was probably the love more than anything. Because I think there's power in that. And one of my favorite quotes, is that love is the strongest medicine.
mm,
And so, with that, you see that in the dreams. Like people will change so significantly, I believe, because of the love that is present in those moments. And I don't know what that does to the body, but that's something that we can take forward as we move forward. And then a lot of people will hang on to that dream because it was so different and the beauty of it was so profound to them that as they move forward in this stressful world we live in and dealing with the stressful emotions of grief, they look back at that and they can still feel that love and it just like washes over them to a
mm,
point where they give them the hope and the courage to keep going. And so for me, yeah, there's a beauty of these dreams is that love is present and it shows you it's present.
yeah.
And I always like to sort of say too that if you can have it in your dream, why can't you have it in waking life?
That's
Like
true.
it's not like making something up. It's in you. It's just finding your pathway towards that. It's almost, I like to sort of see it as a lighthouse that, yeah, like once I deal with my stress, deal with maybe childhood problems, deal with grief, all this sort of stuff, and like work through all that sort of stuff, you get closer to what's possible when it comes to living in love and being human at the same time. And so, yeah, that's sort of what I have to sort of say on that topic. But it's just amazing how profound these dreams can actually be. And I think the love is so strong in some people. I've talked to many atheists who actually decided there must be something more because they had an experience like that they couldn't understand, but it changed them in some way that they believe there must be something more because it felt more real than real. And it's like, how can you have that, right? How can you have a dream that feels realer than anything else you've ever felt in waking life? So it's really interesting how these dreams really can shape our culture and shape our belief system as we move forward.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's so true that I too, like when working with people of different faiths, I will say, even when they pronounce, well, I'm nothing, I'm not an atheist, I'm nothing. And I say, well, you're still going to experience grief. It doesn't get you out of the game. You're still going to emotionally, physically, and spiritually are going to hurt. It's human sorrow. So, however we process this, there's no ticket out. And so many times after someone has died, people have just changed. Like even on Grief Uprooted, I've had people who are, working in marketing for sports, TV, all sorts of stuff, all of a sudden switch their whole lives to I'm writing a book and doing this now. And they take like 180-degree turn, change their whole lives because of this profound death they experienced. And it just shows you, and the opposite of grief is love. And that's exactly what it is. So I can't thank you enough for coming on today. Absolutely loved it. I'm gonna write down all my dreams continuously still. And
Yeah,
I'm not talking not gonna talk about my my horrible, horrible nightmares.
Yeah.
But
Or just find a new way of understanding those nightmares because they're
yeah.
happening for a reason at the same time too. So, it's, at the same time as you can just not write them down and reduce them. But if they're happening so often, I would say that there's something that they're pointing to. And so it's just taking time to work with those and sort of understand where they're coming from. I think that's the more important thing because they are here to teach us a lot about who we are and what we need to find the love and to find the joy in more moments in our life.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I'm going to end on that. So thank you so much for joining us. If people wanted to visit your website, what's your website?
So you can go to griefdreams.ca. You can find
Mhm.
all information, common questions, a lot of other stuff that we didn't talk about today. And then also there's links on there to the Grief Dreams podcast.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And as usual, it is only together that we grieve, and it is only together that we heal. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.